coming up. It's been just one night of sleep before I released my latest video, which is about geometric unity, which now has two definitions, as I think you've learned if you saw that video. It's an hour long, so it's not a minor thing to watch a video by a low-standing person such as myself on such an advanced topic. Today, I would like to cover an interesting development that just occurred in my life because I was able to watch Sir Roger Penrose on Eric Weinstein's podcast. Eric Weinstein literally came out of nowhere and rose to prominence partly on his brother's infidelity at a college campus, which became famous as really a proving ground for some kind of communist insurrection. And Brett misrepresented it and exacerbated the situation in order to become famous. And it's obvious now that Brett and his brother are in league, and it's not for a good purpose. Eric Weinstein is completely disreputable as a scientist. But what I discovered this morning, it was presented to me by the AI chatbot engine, or whatever Google calls it, that selects for me what I might want to see as clickbait. And so there was something with Sir Roger Penrose on that I had seen before, but I wanted to see it again. Something drew me to it. So I watched that video clip, which is only about 12 or 15 minutes long. It's extracted from a much longer interview between Eric Weinstein and Sir Roger Penrose. These men could not be more different if they tried. Sir Roger rose to his level of prominence. He is a Nobel Prize winner, and he's still alive. 91 years old, I believe. My hero. I have his book that I basically tore to shreds, called Road to Reality, which is featured prominently on the rather impressive glass table overlooking a supreme panorama. It's obvious that Eric Weinstein is filthy rich, and he is, through the usual dubious means of being some kind of consular banking system investor consultant. It's easy to make a shitload of money if you're underhanded in that industry, and Eric Weinstein is the master of the trade. Everything about that man is wrong. But what I saw this morning was the other side of Eric that I've never seen before. I really had little perception of his ranking as a scientist because he rarely talks about what he knows. But he does know about the Dirac spinor at such a high level that he's able to carry on a very effective conversation with Sir Roger Penrose, who is probably the world's surviving leading authority on the Dirac system, which is hypercomplexity. I discovered this on my own, and I awarded the term to hypercomplexity once I achieved a certain threshold of understanding from really studying the Dirac wave equation as much as I could, because there's something about what he's done with mathematics that is very exciting. Certainly to Eric it is, because Eric was able to formulate a totally bogus extension of hypercomplexity, which he now believes is the basis of what he calls geometric unity. Now, without in any way touting that, really has been thoroughly debunked by Timothy Nguyen, which was the subject of my video yesterday. Now, what I saw does not make me like Eric anymore. That man is thoroughly compromised. He has a completely different agenda, and he's using science as a cover-up for what he's trying to do, which is rock-bottom evil, disgusting. And his brother is worse, but they're both geniuses in some really low sense, which is still admirable. We can still appreciate men like Blofeld and Dr. Evil because they're intelligent, and we admire the prowess of intelligence, which, can be used for good or evil. He's a menace, and if there were any way to get at him, to get him arraigned and get him off the frickin' public platform, that would be good in a philosophical sense, but this world is much more complicated. So Eric is a player now. That's the whole purpose of Lex Friedman's podcast. is to advance such scum as Eric Weinstein to a position where that man can actually interview Sir Roger Penrose. But the conversation really opened my eyes, and I just realized, after having awoken this morning, I do a lot of thinking during my sleep. I found out over the past 3 years, sleep time is a very productive time for me, but when I wake up...
There's a lot of things that I need to do at once. Because first of all, it's freezing now, so when I get up, I immediately start to go into hypothermia. And I have to pee so bad that I have to go straight to the toilet, even though I cannot breathe.
I don't have enough money for medicine right now, and I'm asthmatic after the campfire, in which I breathed that deadly smoke for 3 solid hours. It destroyed my lungs, and I already had an asthmatic condition, which is now extremely exacerbated. So when I get up,
I want to go to my machine, my inhaler, to get some albuterol and another drug into my lungs to open them up. But I can't because I have to pee. And while I'm peeing, I'm going into hypothermia. And the cat wants to be fed. She sleeps with me.
I know, but I need love. And she licks my hand and loves me, so I like her. Even though I'm not sure about her effect on my asthma. I don't think it's serious, but this morning was quite an active time, the first 5 minutes, and I also want to put on tea. I need to pee, I need to breathe, I need to get warm, I need to feed the cat. And meanwhile, what's going on in my mind is I'm doing all of these vital functions to survive the morning and waking up. I was thinking about geometry. I'm always thinking about that. Now, the conversation that I just witnessed, again, about 15 minutes long or less, it's a clip from Eric Weinstein's podcast on which he had Sir Roger Penrose. During this conversation, I picked up on something that I didn't follow through on when I first heard it. But it's called air on the Dirac spinner. Air, A-I-R. You can look this up. This is exactly what I typed into YouTube, and it goes right to the video, which is less than 3 minutes long. I think if I recall correctly, it's 2 minutes and 12 seconds, something like that. I strongly recommend viewing that. What I want to add to the portrait, the Dirac spinner, what it is what's called a double cover rotation, which has to do with quaternion terminology. So when you spin a particle, it doesn't spin the way a sphere does, but very close to it. What happens is that after one full rotation, its valence is reversed. This has a lot to do with force valence, which you know I'm something of an expert on now, having read Roger Bošković's book, Theoria Philosophiae Naturalis. I own 2 copies of it, and I've studied it thoroughly. I'm still studying it. I studied it yesterday and found every time I read that book, I learn something vital. Because Roger Bošković is unquestionably the greatest scientist who ever lived. There is no doubt about that in my mind. And I have a pretty cogent overview of all these guys, from Einstein to Dirac, Maxwell, Feynman. Bošković is the first. He followed right on the heels of Newton. Literally, as Newton was dying, and Leibniz died, I think, a short time later, Bošković was a young man in Croatia. Actually, Italy is where he spent most of his life. He also lived in France. He went to England. He went all over the place. An amazing man. Just not even talking about his scientific acumen. The long and short of this whole thing, this presentation I'm issuing now, is that the Dirac spinner is an example of extended complexity. And complexity, that is the complex number plane in 2D, can be extended to higher dimensions. But when you do so, and Roger brought this out very clearly on Eric's podcast, Eric knew all about this because it's the basis of his geometric unity sham, and it is a sham. There's no substance to his idea at all. So he's sneaking his way in, and he's gotten in thanks to people like Lex Friedman and Joe Rogan, who are nothing but a gateway for these monsters. And there's several of them. I mentioned Larry Krauss. Eric Weinstein is an international thief. It's pretty clear where these people like Larry and Lex and Eric, they all have a common It's so evil that I can't talk about it, and you may be offended already. You should be, but don't blame me. So this is extremely deep shit, and it's shit. But what these guys are talking about is the greatest insight that a physicist can get right now, including mathematicians and, in my case, a geometer, which is really a word. So this hypercomplexity is something that I have mastered from a completely different direction, a geometrical direction. And I just want to mention that in this interview, Sir Roger explained I prefer to see things geometrically. That is correct. That is the only right way to get at physics today. You must develop a geometrical part of your brain to start to be able to program it, because you're going to have to tell the geometry part of your brain, which is your visualization system, your perceptual space in your head, is called geometry. So it's where we interpret the mathematics, making mathematics nothing but an awl or a hammer. In other words, worthless by itself, but for its application is toward geometry. So the complex number system is more than it had been when it was first discovered. What it does is allow orthogonal computation, which I discovered, essentially, in a completely new sense. But it's more than that. I'll be covering that in upcoming lectures, so I hope you stay tuned. This is approaching 15 minutes. Again, I want to thank all of my viewers. I now have somewhat of a minor following. It's very low on the totem pole of YouTube, but from my perspective, I'm finally getting some results. I make these videos, and I will always make these videos, as long as I think it's useful. So far, it's been invaluably useful to me, regardless of who else watches it. But the reason I'm out on YouTube in the long run is to present this geometry. Well, I have some major new insights now. This has just been the name of the game for 3 years. I make a major discovery about once a month, and it's not showing any sign of going away. This is extremely far-reaching geometry. Now, both Eric Weinstein and Sir Roger Penrose have a really powerful insight into the Dirac spinor. But the way Dirac extended the wave equation methodology beyond Schrödinger, Heisenberg, or Klein and Gordon was to introduce hypercomplexity. You double the dimension, in other words, from 2D to 4D. But when you do so, you're multiplying the number of factors, and so it becomes unwieldy, if that's an adverb. It becomes unwieldily complex for a mathematical part of the mind. And that's why we have supercomputers. It's the only reason we can use Einstein's equations. Einstein's equations are virtually worthless without supercomputer support, because these equations cannot be performed by a human brain. But what a human brain can and must do is see the process geometrically. That's what I promote. This matter of geometry being prominent is fully brought out by Bošković, the greatest scientist by far who has ever lived. He discovered the Bohr atom before any particles were even known about. And he got the correct solution, and it's now being realized that he did. It's from studying Ruđer Bošković's work that I was able to rationalize infinity and solve the quantum paradox. So that's enough hype. None of this is untrue, but for a lone man, I have no accreditation and no colleagues. I have no support system. I don't care. It makes no difference to me. I do this out of the goodness of my heart. Altruism is the foundation of science. It's the only form of human collaboration that actually works, besides the man-wife relationship. Everything else goes to hell after that because of the introduction of sin, which we can't get rid of. And Eric is a prime example of how we're never going to get rid of it until some single group on Earth comes out on top. I think you know what's happening in Gaza. That is the tip of a monstrous iceberg. So the world is coming to an end. We're now in the apocalypse. And Eric is one of the signs that we're very close to the end. Israel is ready to move. The crucifixion of Yeshua HaMashiach, Jesus the Christ, was conducted by the same group that sponsors Eric Weinstein, Lex Friedman, and Larry Krauss. But now they're internationalists, just as Leon Trotsky, the Jew, was an internationalist when he was challenged, when he was head of the Red Army, and destined to be Stalin, although Stalin got rid of Trotsky with an ice pick to the brain in Mexico. These people make James Bond movies look like Cinderella stories. So Eric Weinstein is nobody to admire, but I do admire him because of his intellect, the same way I would admire Mr. Big from the Rocky and Bullwinkle show, or Dr. Evil, or Darth Vader. Who was the guy who controlled Darth Vader? Where Darth would take his whole head off to show the master his brain. Sorry, but I get emotional in the morning because of things that I just described. But thank goodness I have tea, caffeine in the form of tea or coffee, and marijuana.
Which I've smoked continuously except for 10 years of marriage to the Ukrainian princess before she died of cancer. So the reason my voice sounds like this is I've been through some major calamities which make your calamities seem like dung.
I'm still kicking, though. That's because I'm a believer in the way of heaven. Eric Weinstein is not. He's totally against it. But Sir Roger is simply a great scientist, one of my heroes. This is Anna Galactic bringing you the secrets of the universe. Be sure to keep looking up at night. That's where you're going to get your real answers. This is just flavoring to the cake. It's the universe that we want. That's called heaven. And that's the only real heaven there is. And if you want to go there, start now. All right, keep looking up. We'll be right back with more cutting-edge secrets of the universe. Stay tuned.